Welcome to Cashed Out, where we dive deep into some of the most notorious robberies of financial institutions in history. I'm your host, Michael Dwyer, and today we're talking about a string of bank robberies that happened during a time when all eyes were on an up and coming quarterback who was making headlines, and his team was making waves throughout the NFL. Today, we talk about the robbery of the ChiefsAHolic. It was March 2022. The Kansas City Chiefs had just come off of a record season, finishing with a 12-5 record after starting off slowly at 3-4. They had won the AFC West and come so close to winning the conference. People throughout Kansas City, hell, people throughout the nation believed the Kansas City Chiefs were on their way to becoming a 3-time Super Bowl championship team. Unfortunately, the Cincinnati Bengals cut their dream short that year, beating them 27-24 in overtime. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Isn't this supposed to be about bank robberies? Not another sports podcast. To that I say, you're right. And in March of 2022, one of the biggest Chiefs fans was heading down the road of becoming one of the biggest bank robbers in the nation. That fan was Xavier Babidar. 30-year-old Xavier Michael Babidar was from Overland Park, Kansas. In 2022, he was 28 years old, and he grew up a fan of the Kansas City Chiefs. The issue was, from the time he was born, there wasn't much to cheer for. Since 1996, the Chiefs didn't make it past the divisional playoff round, if they made the playoffs at all. Picture this: half of his life, 14 years, the Chiefs didn't even make it to the playoffs. 10 additional years, they lost in either the wild card or divisional playoff round. But for 2 of those years, they won. They made it to the AFC Championship. And then they lost. In the 2017 draft, the Kansas City Chiefs finally drafted Patrick Mahomes. And by the end of the 2018 season, Patrick Mahomes had given an increased excitement to Kansas City fans, including Xavier. In February of 2020, Patrick led the team to their first Super Bowl win in 50 years. This sparked a different kind of craze in Kansas City. We saw all kinds of personalities coming out. For example, the KC Superman, the KC Weird Wolf, and none other than the ChiefsAHolic. Dressed head to toe in a gray wolf suit, Xavier became a staple at Chiefs games for years, and he was adored by fans at Arrowhead Stadium and on social media. But Xavier wasn't an innocent Chiefs fan. Xavier's crime started on March 2nd, 2022. The Great Western Bank in Clive, Iowa was robbed. Now, geographically, Clive, Iowa is less than 3 hours from Kansas City. The robber entered the bank wearing a ski mask. He walked up to the teller, handed them a note indicating that he had a firearm, but he never showed it. He robbed the bank of $70,000 and left on foot. Police later found a glove and almost $1,500 in $20 bills in a nearby wooded area. And from that glove, police were able to get DNA evidence. But it's unknown if they were able to identify Xavier at that time. Xavier made his way back to Missouri and was able to deposit the stolen money into his bank account. Now, anyone who's worked at a bank knows that there is a limit before banks are required to report the amount that you deposit. So depositing $70,000 is sure to set off alarm bell. And it did. But Xavier had split his deposit up into smaller amounts and then lied about the origins of the money, and it worked. But it wouldn't be long before his lifestyle caught up to him. Xavier's strings of robberies continued. On April 28th, Xavier walked into the First National Bank of Omaha in Omaha, Nebraska. Again, Omaha was only about 3.5 hours away from Kansas City. And this time, he brandished a firearm and forced the bank employees to open the vault, leaving with nearly $171,000. Now, I'm not sure what happened, but most of this money, all of it but about $8,000, was recovered after the robbery. Almost seems like he used this as a practice run, or maybe he wasn't sure how to clean up his money, or maybe he was even freaked out about carrying around that much money at the time. Well, on July 13th, Xavier continued his robbery streak by robbing the First Class Community Credit Union in Des Moines, Iowa, less than a 3-hour drive from Kansas City. See a pattern? He once again brandished a firearm, but this time, he was a little more aggressive, hopping over the counter and forcing employees to open the vault, as he had done before. He cleared out the vault, stealing nearly $304,000 before heading back to Missouri. But this was way too much money to just take to his bank and deposit. So, he decided to funnel the money through casinos. He would gamble away what money he could, clean it up, and then deposit the winnings, which were now clean and traceable money, into his bank account. Any reports that were filed could easily be answered as casino earnings. Now that he had a way to clean his money, Xavier was at it again. On November 17th, he robbed a credit union in Nashville, Tennessee. Once again, he brandished a firearm, hopped over the counter, and forced the bank employees to open the vault. This time, he told employees that if they slipped an ink pack into the money, he would come back and put a bullet in their heads. He stole nearly $126,000 and left on foot. Police later found the hat that was left behind, and when they analyzed the DNA inside the hat, it came back as a direct match for DNA left behind at the scene in Clive, Iowa. The March 2nd robbery. So now, Xavier had $126,000 in stolen money that he had to clean. He took $20,000 of that, and he went to a casino a few days later. On November 29th, Xavier was back in action. He went into the Wings Financial Credit Union in Savage, Minnesota. And once again, he brandished a firearm and forced the employees to open the vault. But this time, to his surprise, there were only small bills in the vault. He left empty-handed, but that wouldn't stop him. A few hours later, Xavier brandished a firearm inside the Royal Credit Union in Apple Valley, Minnesota. And just as he had done before, he forced the employees to open the vault. And just like his luck earlier that day, they only had small bills. Now, this time it upset him. What are the odds that you rob 2 banks in one day and they only have small bills? He demanded $100 bills, but the employees let him know that they didn't keep any larger bills in the vault at all. Upset, but out of time, he again left empty-handed and on foot. Now, by the next day, November 30th, you could only imagine Xavier was frustrated. I mean, this was a first for him. 2 banks, one day, nothing to show for it. His next move, though, it shows just how desperate he was. Now, I heard this somewhere, and it probably should have applied to this. Rule number 1, never return to the scene of a crime. But due to his desperation, that's exactly what he did. He returned to the First Interstate Bank, the same bank that he robbed on March 2nd. And this time he got away with an additional $25,000 before making his way back to Missouri. And once he got back, he took some of that money and put it directly into his account. On December 15th, Xavier was once again out to make a quick buck. Now, shortly before 2 p.m., he attempted to enter Pinnacle Bank in Papillion, Nebraska. But as he went to open the doors, he noticed they were locked. Now, this was weird for a Friday at 2 p.m., and it threw him off, so he immediately ran away. The next day, on December 16th, 3 days before the Kansas City Chiefs faced off against the Houston Texans in Houston, everyone in Kansas City was preparing for a face-off. But not just a face-off. I mean, it was the happiest time of the year. People were out shopping for their loved ones, decorating their houses, decorating their desks, trees with Christmas decorations, and preparing for end-of-year festivities. Xavier was robbing yet another financial institution. He walked into the Tulsa Teachers Federal Credit Union in Bixby, Oklahoma, and once again brandished another weapon. He jumped the counter and forced a bank employee to go into the vault. Once inside, he forced the employee to put cash into a plastic bag. He told employees that he would shoot them if they didn't listen. He got away with almost $140,000, but he didn't get far. Police ended up catching up to him shortly after the robbery, and with him he had over $150,000 cash on him. After searching his vehicle, police found goggles, gloves, a ski mask, and multiple bet slips. One of those bet slips was for Barstool Sportsbooks, where he bet $20,000 back on November 19th. Another was for FanDuel, where he bet $4,000 on December 1st. They also found deposit receipts from his financial institution showing deposits of $20,000 and $50,000 from May 2nd. They had finally found him, and they had finally locked him away with an $800,000 bond. But being locked up didn't last long for Xavier. By February 2023, Xavier was back out on the street. He had paid 10% of that $800,000 bond, so $80,000, and agreed to an ankle monitor. He was also unable to leave the state of Oklahoma. Now, instead of going back to robbing banks, he went back to gambling. Prior to his arrest, he remembered that he'd placed 2 bets with the Argosy Casino. One for $5,000 that Patrick Mahomes would win Super Bowl MVP, and another for $5,000 that the Chiefs would win the Super Bowl. Well, guess what happened in February 2023? The Kansas City Chiefs won the Super Bowl, Patrick Mahomes was named Super Bowl MVP, and Xavier won $100,000. Now, since he was stuck in Oklahoma and on house arrest, he wasn't able to go to the casino to collect his winning. But the casino was able to mail him a check. In early March, after receiving his winnings from the Argosy Casino, Xavier had had enough. He withdrew $98,000 from his JP Morgan Chase bank account. 4 days later, he cut his ankle monitor off and left Oklahoma. While on the run, he used the money from his winnings to purchase a vehicle in Nevada. But those winnings wouldn't last forever, and Xavier went back to what he knew: robbing banks. On June 8th, Xavier entered Heritage Bank in Sparks, Nevada. He was wearing a beanie, a medical mask, and had on a fanny pack. He didn't have a firearm at this point, so he showed the teller a note on his phone demanding that they give them money. Ultimately, he got away with $1,100, far less than what he was used to collecting. Less than a month later, he tried it again. But this time, he was in El Dorado Hills, California. On July 3rd, he entered a U.S. bank wearing a gray hoodie, a medical mask, and a reflective yellow vest, kind of like a construction vest. And just as he did before, he showed the teller a note on his phone demanding money. No firearms, no vault access, and all in all, he walked out with $950. But this time, police weren't far behind. I mean, this was his MO, and they were hot on his trail. And 4 days later, Xavier was captured near Sacramento, California. Initially, after being caught, Xavier pled not guilty. But eventually, on February 28, 2024, Xavier changed his plea to guilty with 1 count of money laundering, 1 count of transporting stolen property across state lines, and in a separate case, 1 count of bank robbery. Along with changing his plea, he admitted to stealing over $847,000 from financial institutions in over 11 states. Some of the stolen money was recovered, but most of it was not. Xavier was ordered to pay nearly $600,000 in restitution, as well as forfeiting any property involved in his activities. This included his prized autograph painting of Patrick Mahomes. Now, attorneys argue that Xavier developed a severe gambling addiction, and this was the primary driver of his behavior. But many in law enforcement disagree. They don't believe it was an addiction to gambling or an addiction to the Chiefs, but instead there was an addiction to the fame of being the ChiefsAHolic and that spotlight that came with it. In April 2024, a judge ordered Xavier to pay $10.8 million to the Bixby tellers he threatened with the gun. That was additional to the $600,000 he was required to pay in restitution. On September 8th, 2024, the same day as the Chiefs' home opener, Xavier was sentenced to 17 and a half years in prison and 3 years supervised release afterwards. During his sentencing, Xavier apologized to his victims, to Kansas City, which he called his home, and to his mother and brother. The U.S. attorney stated that the actions of Babadar were brazen and traumatic for the bank employees robbed in Bixby, Oklahoma. Stephen Cyrus, a KC FBI agent, stated, "The banks were not the only victims of these crimes. Babadar terrorized bank employees throughout his multi-state crime spree while relishing his celebrity status." December 26, 2024. Amazon Prime releases ChiefsAHolic, a documentary based around Xavier Babadar. It brings to wonder if this is what he wanted all along. Thank you for joining us on Cashed Out. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. We'll be back next week with another story from the world of true crime. Until then, stay safe and stay vigilant.